bank data sets from the World Bank, and it's indexed by every country you can think of, except when they might have changed their name from 1960 till today. So it's a data set that goes back 1960 till today, and it's population base rate, base total, and growth rate. So we have a nice little, we can kind of flex our calculus a little bit, because we're thinking, if this is the original function, this is the base function, is the way these change over time, these bars. Here we have the first derivative. So you can see India's growth rate has been decreasing since about 1984. And this is interesting because, I'm not very good at history or anything, or I don't know too much, but I have cursory knowledge of some things, right? And if you take the example of China, my cursory knowledge of the Great Leap Forward, a attempt to plan the economy and attempt to do a lot of other things, might not have worked out too well, right? So this data set picks up right in the middle of the Great Leap Forward. And look, from 1960 to 61, the growth rate went from almost 2% to minus 1%. So that's not very good. Another interesting thing when you see China is you see they're recovering from the Mao years, and the growth rate is very volatile for a while. But what do you think happens right here? Can anybody think? They had the one-child policy. So the growth rate the one-child policy is implemented right here, and the growth rate stabilizes. Look how stable that ended up. So yeah, you can just think of any country, any historical facts, and see if you can verify the historical knowledge with the data.
Awesome. Thank you, Quinn. I would love to see more here. That was awesome how you had those charts that were linked together. So great job. Again, if you can drop any links that you may have into Slack so that your peers can check it out, and any questions for Quinn, start a thread in Slack as well, because that's fascinating stuff. All right. Next up, Alejandro. You ready? Can you unmute yourself and share your screen if you so choose?
Absolutely. I'm going to start sharing my screen now. And yeah, as soon as I start talking, feel free to start the clock.
All right.
All righty. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Awesome. So the focus of my project was to analyze Lambda student data. Basically, my idea was that one of the fundamental advantages that Lambda has is its ability to iterate its curriculum quickly. And so what I wanted to see is if there was a way to measure that using actual student data. So I asked a bunch of people for the data. After a lot of back and forth, they gave it to me, which was super cool. And basically what I did is I took the computer science cohorts, because those are the most common cohorts in Lambda School. There's like over 14 right now. And I basically analyzed the first 6. So I went from the first 6 cohorts of computer science, and I measured how many days it took for them to get their first offer. Now, the interesting thing here was that there was a lot of missing data, which I used value counts as a nifty little tool to find that. Basically, there's like 32 instances of people getting their offer on day 0, which is incredibly unlikely. So after dropping that and kind of cleaning the data up more and more and more, I was able to finally hone in on some actionable values. Then I segregated everything according to the cohort that they were in, whether it's like CS1, CS2, all the way up to CS6. And then I calculated the average amount of days that it took for each student in that cohort to get a job offer. And finally putting that together into a visual, a very simple little bar plot, we can see that there is a slight downtrend. It's not as sharp as I would have expected it, but there's a lot of missing values and a lot of missing data that could have shown skewed this one way or another. So I'd be really interested to, as more cohorts become available, seeing whether this trend would hold or magnify or reverse it in any way. But fundamentally, it was really good practice, and I think it's going to be something that a lot of metric-oriented organizations really need to rely on to kind of keep their finger on the pulse, especially in the case of Lambda as they're scaling. So yeah, that's about it.
Awesome. Thank you, Alejandro. Appreciate it. So next up, and again, same procedure, please drop any link in Slack. And if anyone has any questions, please start a thread. And next up is Chad Owen. So Chad, if you would go ahead and get ready to unmute yourself, share your screen if you'd like. And what I'm going to try to start doing is to DM the person who's next, who's on deck, so that you can have a moment to prepare your screen and prepare yourself psychologically as well. But now let's give Chad our attention. Whenever you're ready. All right, I'm not hearing you yet, Chad. You might still be muted. I do see your screen. Ed, you want to put a comment in Slack or the Zoom chat to help us know what's going on?
He's saying issues, can you circle back? So let's go to whoever's next.
Sure. Okay. So next is Dakota. So Dakota, if you can unmute yourself and share your screen if you'd like.
It won't let me share until Chad. There we go.
All right.
Can you guys hear me now? This is Chad, sorry.
Yeah. So we can come back to you next, but let's we'll go to Dakota.
Yeah, go ahead, Dakota. Sorry.
All right.
Thanks for your flexibility, Dakota.
Not a problem. So for my project, I kind of wanted to go off the grid of my knowledge. So I started digging around in some data sets and found a trend in export sales. Each state would take a change in trend at every export sales or at every election date. So I started to do a little more digging into that and found that every election cycle for the candidate, if it was their home state, the trend would change, usually in a positive way, but if they were elected, it was almost always a positive change. So I split the statistics for each state, given their candidate in their election. So George W. Bush has Texas, and he wins the election. You can see a change in rate of increase and then an intense change in increase. Whereas John Kerry from Massachusetts, when he loses, it almost stalls completely. Now, it wasn't raising much to begin with, but it does stop and increase altogether. And going through the years, I have a 16-year period here, but going through the years, it almost always follows a trend of a better outcome for the winning state. So Barack Obama, even though he was affected by the Great Recession and the housing crash, showed that the recovery time was a lot shorter compared to Arizona and John McCain, who lost. So one of the things that I also found was that the winning candidate usually came from a state that had higher export sales. As in Illinois, the trend is always higher than what Massachusetts has. And, you know, it shows that Barack Obama won, not necessarily because of the higher sales rate, but in general.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing this, Dakota. I think we can all learn from this. I mean, the data story came across so clear just with a couple vertical lines and a couple text annotations. It's like just those simple elements really told the story very well. So I'm really excited to see that. Thank you for sharing. So next we will circle back to Chad.
Cool, thanks. Sorry about that, guys. Can you see my screen now?
Yep.
Okay. So what I did was similar to Quinn. I was looking around on the Fed and I came across the state populations. And I just threw together a small chart of all of them. You can't really tell who's who, but I noticed in the year 2000 there were a couple states who started ticking upward, and their like rate of growth was a lot higher than the other states. And so I said, well, I don't really know how to separate these, but I'll go back to the Civil War and I'll separate them like by South and by North. And so I came across that, and there was a significant difference between the Southern growth and the Northern. And so I split it up again by the Union states. And same thing, the growth in terms of the Confederacy states was a lot higher than the border and the Union states. And I found this interesting, especially because the Union has a lot more states than the Confederacy, and the border as well. So I decided to look at the year-over-year growth rates, and to my surprise, they were all exactly the same. I should have expected this, however. So around like 1920 was the influenza, the epidemic. Then around the 40s is when you had World War II. And then in 2000 was when there was a spike in the immigration. So they were all about the same, but I don't really have too many takeaways other than it was a good thing that the Civil War was not fought today, because it looks like the numbers would be a lot different than they were in the 1860s. And hopefully I'll be recreating something similar to this over break.
Awesome. Thanks, Chad. I would agree with the takeaway that I would prefer to not have another Civil War. That's probably not too controversial there. Great job. Next up, we have Brian. So, Brian, if you can unmute yourself and share your screen if you've got something to share.
All right, so hopefully you guys can kind of see this.
Yep.
So I went to look at the NFL players' relative value based on the salaries that they get paid versus how many points they score in games using the 2017 season data. And as you can kind of see, this chart doesn't show the 4,500 some players that were in the league, but these are only players that scored over 40 points during the entire season. So I wanted to limit it because otherwise there was a very large conglomeration of numbers down on the bottom, which wasn't very telling of anything. And with this breakdown, with the 40-point limit, broke it down into only 5 different positions happened to score over 40 points throughout the entire season. So I did want to kind of make a decision of whether or not which of these positions actually were ones that had higher value to a team based on their salary versus what they scored for points. So the points scored here, you'll see most of the players are still down in this bottom left-hand corner. But when we break it down to position, so we'll look at running backs, all very much are in the same kind of small little congregation. They all score roughly in the same location of number of points, but their salaries are also pretty well grouped together. So we probably wouldn't put a real high value on that because they aren't typically scoring a lot of points, but they aren't paid very much. Now when we look at, say, wide receivers, we see that there's a larger spread. Now they also don't score a lot of points compared to some of the other positions, but their salaries are much more varied, and there's a lot more players on the very high end of salaries here. So the wide receivers have even less value So the takeaway is just finding which players have the best value, and it appears it's quarterbacks and kickers.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. And one thing that I liked is just your title at the very beginning. It's simple, but you stated very clearly what question you're exploring, and it's an interesting question. So I would love to dig deeper into your project when we have a little more time. So thank you for sharing. Next up is Samir.
Hang on 1 second, I'm trying to share.
All right.
Okay, so I'm going to look at the health and wealth of nations. And the indicators of health I'm going to look at, this is actually data from the CIA Factbook database. The indicators of health are infant mortality rate and HIV/AIDS rate in adults. And the indicators of wealth are going to be GDP per capita. So I'm going to see, let's go to wealth first. This is what the correlation of GDP per capita looks like, given all of these indicators of wealth. And you can see that the highest correlation is about 0.25, which I guess as a nation, there is a lot of moving parts, so you wouldn't expect too much of a correlation. But I still found some of these are really highly correlated, which was very surprising. And mainly budget expenditures and imports and budget revenues and exports. These four are highly correlated. So there are also other things you should look at is the linear correlation versus rank correlation versus monotonic. And there is some linear correlation, but mostly you can see this is a monotonic correlation. So now let's look at how countries are doing as a whole. And here we see that some countries the scale on the left is GDP per capita rising up, and scale on the right is health rising up to the right. So the health is mostly, some countries are going lower in health, some countries are going higher in health, but mostly all countries are increasing in wealth. And it's interesting, there's kind of half and half split here between those increasing in health and increasing in wealth. Now let's dig into the details of the health.
All right, Samir, thank you. We're at time, but fascinating stuff. I'm intrigued by those arrow charts. I would love to dig in more. So if there's more you'd like to share, feel free to do so on Slack. And now next up is Audrey.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. You're good.
All right. So my background is in education, so I was really interested in seeing, just exploring the applications of data science in education. So the topic that I discuss is data visualization and how it can be an assistance to teachers when they want to support students. A lot of times teachers collect a lot of data in the form of grades, but normally these grades are just kept like in a table form and presented as a report card, and there's not a lot of analysis. And I believe that my hypothesis is that if we were to create charts based on this data, there would be a lot a teacher can gain that can help them be more effective in the classroom. So I looked at 3 points. The first was noticing student trends. A lot of times we have averages that we give students based on their terms, but we don't really see the trend if this is going up or down or staying stagnant. So this chart shows 3 different students who all show a different trend. And if a teacher were to see this, then maybe the student that's represented in green, they can see that there was a drastic drop in their averages, which might make them respond to that student more differently than a student who maybe has a 70 but is coming up from a 60, for example. So from the trend, the teacher is able to gain more knowledge on how to support the student. The second is noticing class trends. So this is all the same classroom, but these are the grades for art, Afrikaans, and English. And you can see that they all have kind of a different type of curve. They don't have different type of curve or a different type of distribution. So what I saw, like, for example, with art had a lot of pass-fail grades where the student either got 100% or the student got a 0, basically. And I can see from the distribution of the grades that this is probably hurting the student. Oh, okay. Yeah. So that's basically it.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Audrey. This is a fascinating and important topic that you've presented well, and those distributions are really interesting. Those different distributions. So I would love if you could dig into that even more and share that story with us when we have more time. So next up, we have Michael.
Okay, I'm just going to share something quickly before I start.
All right.
Okay. Okay, there we go. Okay, ready to start?
All right, yep, ready.
Okay, so I kind of did a slightly different project idea or style in that I developed a website for generating visualizations for movie data. What it does is it creates an infographic poster based on the data. So just kind of running through the website, you type in like a search term, and you can select it, go on to the next page. And from there, you get a synopsis, some information about the movie, and options to kind of change how the poster will look and like colors and everything like that. So not really going to go into that in much detail, but I'm going to show you an output that I've already done because it does take a while to generate. So this is what the kind of style that the infographic produces. It creates 5 different word clouds from 3 different websites based on reviews. And what it does is it looks at adjectives and takes those adjectives and kind of gives them, says if they're positive or negative based on a pre-modeled lexicon from NLTK. So as you can see, we have word clouds from IMDb, Rotten Tomatoes, and Metacritic. The second thing that I was looking at was profit and sales. So like how the gross sales in the US compared to foreign, how much profit there was overall compared to the budget. And finally, I included awards and nominations. So like how many wins did they get compared to how many nominations that they didn't win.
Awesome. Perfect timing. Michael, this is amazing. Just to be clear, you didn't have to do, nobody had to do this, what Michael did. And in general, I've discouraged scope creep and will continue to discourage scope creep. But if you can pull it off, I mean, the assignment was to create a visualization, and you created a tool that creates many visualizations. So awesome job. Very
Thanks.
cool.
Sorry, I just forgot to mention one thing. I did work with Chris Saylor on this, and I'm really sorry that I didn't bring this up earlier, Chris.
Sure. Awesome. Awesome teamwork. Great job, guys. So next up, we have Valerie.
I'm going to share my screen.
Perfect.
Okay, so the U.S. Senate has always been unrepresentative of the nation's population. Every state, regardless of their population, gets 2 senators. But over the years, the Senate has become even less representative, as you can see from this chart. It started out at about 30% representative, and it's gone down to 17-18%. And this situation has real consequences for our democracy. One of those being that the majority of the Senate represents only 18% of the population. And the main reason the framers included unrepresented institutions such as the Senate and the Electoral College was to prevent the tyranny of the majority. And they wanted to prevent the majority from imposing their will on the minority. But right now, it seems we have tyranny of the minority. So the next Senate is going to have 47 Senate Democrats, and they represent 52% of the population, which is a majority. And yet we're going to get Republicans in the majority in the Senate with 53 seats. And so the framers had wished to prevent civil unrest that could arise from a far-off majority imposing their will on a minority in a particular region. They wanted people from across all the regions of the country to be represented. But now there's a risk of civil unrest from the opposite, from the disconnect between the Senate and the people who they're meant to represent, and that's only going to grow if we don't make changes. So what I propose to guard it against this tyranny of the minority while balancing guard against the tyranny of the minority while balancing the rights of the tyranny of the balancing against the tyranny of the majority as well is that I propose that we create Senate districts, have them be proportioned by population, and we'll guard against the tyranny of the minority by continuing to have the electoral college, so we can balance out the rights of both the majority and the minority.
Valerie, this is really, really good. Thank you for sharing. I mean, you very clearly told a story about an important topic, verbally and visually, both in this blog post and in your presentation right now. So awesome job. I got caught up in it, so I apologize. I don't think I got a DM to the next person. But Mark, could you forgive me for that? Mark Oliver, you are up next, please.
Sure. Okay.
It's my fault for not giving you the heads up, but yeah, if you got something.
Okay. Do you see the browser, my Chrome browser?
Not yet. I'm seeing you in the webcam. At the bottom of the Zoom window, do you see a share button, like a green share icon with an arrow that would give you some choices of what to share?
Is that it?
Well, ironically, I can't see what you're pointing to on the screen because I don't see your screen yet. Yeah. Oh, yep. You got it. Awesome. Thank you. Yep. I am seeing your screen. I'm seeing some open office.
Oh boy, that's not even what I wanted.
All right. Can you maybe go to your Chrome? I see your Chrome icon there. Yeah. If you can pull that up. Okay, perfect. Is that what you wanted to share?
You got Chrome now?
Yep, I got Chrome. I'm seeing a Medium blog post. I'm assuming that's yours.
Right.
Let's
okay,
scroll to the top and I'll get that timer started.
All right, so I'm just posting the site I'm at right now.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, so what I did is I used a couple of websites to get lists of URLs, and then I used a site that looks at what packages or tools, technologies that are being used at each website. And the particular site I used has a 4 A to Z character search field. So I used the first 2 characters. I didn't use the last 2 characters. So I have 676, which is 26 squared times more sites to look at, potentially. So I have a very small sample. Well, I use a tool called Selenium to automate each site by sending clicks and text. And I took the URLs from the first site and put them through Selenium 1 URL at a time. then I straight the technologies from the site that display the technologies, and from those I thousands of columns. I decided to look at certain common tools, PHP, Redux, React, Rails, jQuery, Facebook, a tool called Neural, WordPress, Twitter, Angular, Vue, and TypeScript. And so any column that had a case sensitive match for any of these things, I made a set for that. And then for these columns, it's already 2 minutes.
Already 2 minutes, but you know what?
Okay.
Even if you didn't get to cover everything you wanted to cover, it's clear that you have a
it's
really
on the
great
GitHub
idea
site.
here.
Sorry,
It's okay. We'll move on, but feel free to share any other thoughts you'd like in Slack. It's a fascinating idea and ambitious technically. Web scraping all those sites with Selenium, that's a awesome task to take on. So great job. Thank you for sharing.
Thanks.
And next up, we have Zarina. All right, I'm seeing Zarina. I'm seeing your screen. I'm not hearing you yet, so you might be still muted. Zarina, can you hear us? You might want to put something in Slack chat. Okay, you hear us. That's great. I am not hearing you, so I don't know if it's a microphone issue or a. I think Zarina has left and may come back. What we'll do, maybe we could we go to the next person? Okay, Zarina's back.
You look unmuted, Zarina, in the Zoom right now. So you have the correct Zoom setting. So if we're not hearing you, it must be a problem with your actual microphone or operating system, which is always very painful, and that happens to everybody. So
maybe Zarina, could we maybe try to loop back to you? Try again in a little bit, if that's okay. And could we go to put you on the spot, Rick Clayton? Would you be ready to go?
Ready as I'll ever be.
All right, nice.
Hey guys, can you all see my screen?
Yeah, I see it.
Great. What I did is I always had an interest in water parameters. I'm big into fish aquariums, things like that. So I've kind of taken an interest in it. There's a lot of data out there on it, so I kind of wanted to do an analysis of how different parameters vary over time, etc. I kind of underestimated the amount of data, so you'll see I kind of had to go through a paring down process. As a point of reference, from 3 weeks ago, here's my very first plot. Didn't turn out so well, but my mom still has it on the refrigerator, so I guess I'm happy. What I did for this first one was I went ahead and plotted just the state of California. I plotted all the different water locations. There's actually 40,000 of them. That's not 40,000 dots. That just made the whole screen blue. So that was way too many to deal with. So what I did is I pared it down to a representative set, both geographically and by the number of collection samples that were taken and by their history. So I had five different locations that were waters tested at, but then I still had about 400 parameters. And how to pare the parameters down. I pared the parameters down by the ones that are most frequently tested. Why are they most frequently tested? Because they're most important. So I pared down by that, but then I still had a whole bunch of graphs to do. And I didn't think anybody wanted to sit there and look at 20 different graphs, and go through them. So what I was able to do is I used the form fill in Colab, and I actually made it where the graph is interactive. So we can pull up individual graphs. We can select from 5 different locations that are displayed on the map, along with 10, I think 9 actually, different parameters. And what happens there is when we select those, the different graphs come up. Each one changes the title, changes the location, and then changes the actual parameter. And if we go over to Colab and kind of show you a little bit, I kind of got onto this, but for example, if I switch it to a different location here and a different parameter, and for my finale, click the button, it comes up with a random graph. So that's actually about 20 different graphs rolled in there. I'd like to make some more and do some more. That's about it.
Great job, Rick. Awesome. And something I mentioned in Slack, but I think is useful for everybody to realize. In general, I discourage being self-deprecating. You shouldn't have a bunch of apologies about why your work isn't good. Share it proudly. But if you are going to be self-deprecating and you can be funny like Rick was showing that first plot, and then you can contrast it with that was the before, here's the after, and you show a beautiful map, then maybe that's okay. But yeah, great job, Rick. And now we've got Peyton up.
All right, let me go ahead and get this screen shared. Okay, can y'all see that? Y'all should be looking at me, looking at y'all, or no?
Now I see it, yep.
Excellent, and let's begin.
All right.
So I want to go ahead and go with something near and dear to my heart, which is Lambda School. Obviously, we're making a fairly significant investment in time, so I wanted to go ahead and assess the health of the startup. So I wanted to use existing data, which was Google Trends and Slack Analytics. Looking at the Slack Analytics, we can see that there's been very consistent growth. If you look at this, this is a linear curve, which is very important when a startup is just beginning, because it means you can grow and develop as an organization without having explosive growth that is overwhelming. If we start to look at what's going on with this growth, we can see that if we look here at the blue, these are days where members are gained net, and in the red, these are days where members are lost net. This gives us an idea that there's some attrition going on, but on the whole, we're seeing more growth. Net change over the course of the year has been plus 951. So next I wanted to go ahead and look at engagement. So weekly users posting messages versus weekly active users versus our total member population. As we can see, across the board, engagement is increasing, but there does remain a gap between weekly active users and those users posting messages. Part of me is wondering whether or not there's some people who are just using Zoom for communication and GitHub for their projects. Next, we look at the Google Analytics. So we can see Lambda, which was founded in 2017, is much newer than Flatiron School and App Academy, which were founded in 2012, actually on the same day, apparently. If we look here, we can see that the search trends for Lambda School are growing rapidly, while the same could not be said necessarily of App Academy, though Flatiron's seeing growth as well. If we take and move to a narrower time frame, then we can actually start to see Lambda School search options are starting to eclipse Flatiron. And again, we see that App Academy is not seeing the same growth here. That covers it.
Awesome. Polished presentation. You obviously practiced your 2 minutes, and it shows. Fantastic job. Really great. Daniel, you are up next, man.
All right. 1 second.
Sure.
Can you see that?
Yep.
Okay, great. So I wanted to do my project on the importance of data. So I thought a good thing to do would be to grab something that was very polarizing. So of course I picked the president. And I collected a database of polls. I ended up with something like 7,000 polls over the last 2 years, tracking his approval and disapproval ratings. I have them in Medium, but I can even examine them further here. One of the takeaways from this is that as the sample size becomes larger and so more representative of the American population, there's a very clear upward trend to his polls, which you wouldn't necessarily expect if you're someone like me who spends all their time on the internet. This chart is maybe a little less clear, but it shows the overall trends a little better, of his approval going up by about 5 points and his disapproval going down by about 5 points, with a little bit of overlap here for some some things that have bipartisan support. In this case, this would be the North Korea summit announcement. This one would be the 1-year anniversary of Charlottesville. I don't know what he did in mid-October, but people like that as well. And I took a chart here that compared his approval ratings over time to Obama's. You can see that in the same time frame, Barack Obama lost about 20 points, whereas Trump's only lost about 10. So his approval rating is actually a lot flatter than you might believe. Another interesting thing is that these two, approval and disapproval, never cross. So it's clear that people have pretty much made up their mind no matter what he does, which brings me back to the importance of using data and being open to new evidence. There we go.
Awesome. Great job. I didn't get the DM out to the next person, but that is Chris Seiler. So if Chris, you could get ready, and Daniel, again, beautiful scatter plots, and I think it's fair to say that you call your own shots largely based on an accumulation of data. So great job there. So Chris, sorry for lack of warning, but feel free to unmute yourself and share your screen.
Sure, no problem. Can you see my screen?
I can.
Yeah, so I worked, am I good to start?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, so I worked with Michael. This is pretty much the first iteration of the project we worked on. I mostly focused on a lot of back-end stuff. And this is something from a while ago. This is basically generating a word cloud from like reviews for a movie. And it uses Beautiful Soup, natural language processing, and a bunch of other things. It's pretty beefy library. That's a larger example of what one would look like. And yeah, so going into we wanted to actually go ahead and generate infographics rather than just the word clouds. And it's pretty. I don't even know where to begin with explaining it, but here's another like example word cloud for that the site would potentially generate. This backend code isn't on the site yet, the one that's generating an infographic like this. And this isn't this is still pretty much a rough draft for this iteration of it too. It's not even aligned properly, and we need to look at the design. But yeah, it's a pretty big project. So
awesome, great job. This is a really fascinating one. So yeah, I'm really impressed with your guys' teamwork. Thank you for sharing.
Yep, thank you.
So next up we have Kaylee.
Just gonna pull up my blog post here.
All right.
All right. So my topic or project is about the New York Times bestseller list, specifically.
Kaylee, I'm seeing your screen, but not the blog post yet. I don't know if it's on a different monitor.
Oh yeah, there we go. Hold on. Let's try this again. All right. Got the blog post now?
Yep.
All right. Okay, so fiction books on the New York Times bestseller list from the years 2008 to 2016. It's a pretty big deal to hit the bestseller list, so aspiring authors will want to see if there's any way that they could actually get on that list. So I decided to look at any trends that I might be able to find there. So first I broke it down by category. And it's obvious that suspense thrillers and general fiction actually dominate the list, which could be because there are more of that genre of book, but that also means that there's more opportunity in those genres, more readership, so it could allow you to get on the bestseller list more than any other genre. So I also looked at if there was a gender gap, if maybe males dominated the list or females, and it looks like they actually do split the list pretty evenly over the years. but most books do tend to just have one author. So then I took a look at the authors and how often you could see their name on the list. And like there's some pretty big names on there who have been publishing books for a really long time. And the top 20 actually comprise 29% of the bestseller list appearances. But most authors are only on the list for about a week. So if you have a big name, you're going to be on there for a while, especially if you're putting out books all the time. So then I also took a look at like the books that were on the list for the most number of weeks. And again, most books will only be on the list for 1 week, but if you're up there, then you're selling quite a bit. All right, that's it.
Great. Kaylee, awesome job. I mean, in addition to outstanding explanatory graphics that looks like they could be a 538, I mean, you had really good subheadings that made it really easy to, if somebody wanted to skim this and find the interesting bits, they could do that easily. And even the nice stock photography illustration at the beginning. So it's just a really well-presented blog post. Thank you for sharing. So you're welcome. So next up is Carlos.
Okay. Let me share my screen.
All right.
My project is analyzing the Spanish League soccer Major League season last year. And my goal was to find out which players would be most dominant or most decisive towards the end of a game when the game is on the line. So I used a database from an API and took a long time till this morning working on the data because most of the data was raw text. So eventually was able to create a table finding which players scored in every game, finding out if it was an own goal, what minute the goal was scored, if it was in additional time, what team the player played for, and eventually find out if the score tied the game, brought the score up by 1, by 2, or just got their team closer by 1 goal. And eventually my goal was to create a rating, a grade for each goal based on what kind of score it was and at what minute it was scored. So eventually I created a formula to rate the player and based on weight by time and the quality or the score. So each player gets a rating by the score. So eventually analyzed the players that scored the most in the season and compared it to my grading. And over here it tells them the grading, measured that eventually if they scored in the last 10 minutes of the game. So here you can see that the player that scored the most that season only got a rating of 1.95, which you can tell that my grading is not that great. But eventually I would love to explore this more.
Awesome. Great job, Carlos. I know a lot of hard work and goes into that data wrangling. So do please share some of the visuals that we didn't get time for. Share those in Slack. I'm looking forward to see where you go with this next. Great project. So next up, we have Christopher Tolbert.
All right. I am sharing my screen. All right, so I looked at the NBA ELO rating, and basically I did a blog post in terms of if it's too long, didn't read, you should take a look at ELO ratings before your next fantasy league game. Made a comparison between basketball and stats. There's a lot of similarities, just even in sports, whether it's the skill that it takes to learn something, and even you got to push through sometimes, which super excited about this project. But in sports, there's a lot of metrics that are used. Some are more useful than others, like WAR, wins above replacement, effective field goal percentage, and then there's others that are not as useful, which player efficiency ratings, point per games, those kind of things. And what I wanted to look at is the ELO rating and how significant or what impact does it have on outcome. And just a brief explanation of ELO rating is it's a zero-sum calculation for all games and for skill-based games, which is used heavily in chess. But for basketball, you look at the final score, win relative to the probability of winning, and then all the scores calculated. That's what goes into the rating. For just a top-level look, I evaluated all the games that have been played since 1946, which is about over 60,000. And it looks like a home team has a general advantage of about 61%. And if you have the highest ELO rating, you have an advantage of 63.5%, which is really good. And if you're the home team and have the highest ELO rating, it's interesting, doesn't have as significant, it's about 62%. So initially looked at a comparison of all pre and post-game ELO ratings. And as I looked at those ratings, what came up was that there was a better correlation between higher ELO rating than lower ELO rating for the probability of winning. So time ran out, but that's pretty much what I have.
Yeah, can you share this link in Slack? Because I'd like to take that deeper dive. Your visualizations look great, and just the quality of your writing and explanation, the way you explain ELO rating to someone who's not familiar with it. Great job, Christopher. So next up, we have Crawford Collins.
All right, let me share. All right, so FICS exploration window. All right, I'm looking at chess data. For part of it, I use the same data set as Rudy earlier, and like Christopher right before me, it also heavily centered on ELO ratings. So one thing I looked at, how well can, if there's any low-hanging fruit that low ELO players can do to mimic or just copy higher grade chess players to improve, just easy, quick things. Looked at the first 4 moves for everybody. One thing I looked at, castling in the first 4 moves. I don't have a fancy chart for it, but I will say that for black and white, castling in the first 4 moves improves your score at high ELO and low ELO. And then I looked at putting the opponent in check in the first 4 moves. And for human players, white and black, it hurts your chances of winning. And I also looked at AlphaZero versus Stockfish data, and Stockfish castled a lot, and it hurt itself. AlphaZero didn't castle, and then for checking, AlphaZero didn't put its opponent in check early on either. And to examine opening moves, I made a little program that you play, and it goes on. So we'll select white, and you see the most common opening moves for white. See E4 is played a lot, D4, and high ELO players and low ELO players play those at about the same rate, but higher ELO players tend to play C4 and NF3 a lot. And if you look at AlphaZero, they played NF3 and D4 exclusively. And so we'll just follow like AlphaZero did, play NF3, get a nice board, and we'll see, according to a separate database of high ELO openings, the strongest move was interesting G3. I didn't put the full table for everything in there, but G3 isn't played as much as more dominant openings. So we can see NF3, C5. I think that's my time. All right, thank you.
Yep, that's your time. But that was so cool at the end to see but wait, there's more. Like I have chess running interactively in my Jupyter notebook. That was awesome. Thank you. So up next, we have Zachary.
How's it going, guys?
Hey.
All right, can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. So for my project, I took a look at a data set that was compiled by Clemson researchers, and it's a bunch of tweets from the Internet Research Agency. which was indicted for pushing Russian propaganda on Twitter. So out of the 3 million tweets, about 2 million of them were in English. And I wanted to focus on several classes that were labeled by the researchers. So this is about 1.5 million tweets here. So 3/4 of everything in English fell into one of these categories. So 3 types. One, either trolling on the right or left, so expressing extreme views. And then also news feed bots, which would retweet or spam other news stories. So for the political troll bots, these word clouds are very helpful in visualizing what they were emphasizing on Twitter. So they would be quoting stories, adding fairly extreme analysis on the left side. Racism, other forms of injustice are emphasized on the right side. Patriotism, the army, Trump. There's no surprise as far as what controversial topics are mentioned. And if we look at some of the news feed bots here, a lot of them actually had names that clearly were meant to inspire confidence in Americans. So Today Pittsburgh, Seattle_Post, clearly imitating legitimate news sources. And although regular news sources do focus on the negative, and that's been widespread, these had a particular emphasis on negative incidents. So any form of corruption, any police or school shootings, any controversial news stories about Trump, these were spreading them at above average frequency. So I would take away that. Good.
Awesome. Thank you, Zach. Yeah, important topic, and I like the way you laid out the story. I mean, like we're intrigued, wanting to know what happens next. So do share that link in Slack, please. And up next, we have Manjula.
Okay. Do you see the screen? My screen? Yep. All right. So I chose a topic on home remodeling. I thought I would analyze the data, and my initial idea was to see the trend and also look into the age groups and also like income and which cities spend more on remodeling. I had lots of data. Actually, I had a lot of data, almost like 26 Excel sheets. So I spent lots of time just thinking about which sheets were more useful for me. So yeah, so as I went ahead in my project, I figured that this is not going to be my only topic anymore. I would have to focus on how did I clean my data actually. So in my post, I talked about the graphs I got, like just a few plots. I could not get many. So this was a Harvard Center's data set I got. So I checked for 20 years from 2 years, 1995 and 2015, if there was any change in spending, like in different categories. What I saw was only like 2 categories, I would say, room additions and also kitchen remodeling, and rest were pretty much the same kind, wasn't anything super interesting. Then I thought maybe let's see how is it in my area, in local area. So when I checked for Palo Alto, single room addition cost is around like more than $50,000, and kitchen remodeling it's again like $50,000 is for major some jobs. So then I thought, okay, let me see which are the companies who does that work. So I picked a website called Remodeling. They conduct lots of research around this industry. So from their data, I found that these were the 50 biggest companies in the nation. Okay. So, all right. Okay. That was it. So it was lots of struggle with data, and that was my story. It was my takeaway.
Very good, Manjula. Thank you for sharing. Interesting insights and difficult data wrangling. So your project had it all. Awesome. So next up, we have Pierre.
How are you doing?
Good.
All right. So for my project, I wanted to create a website where I could have notebooks similar of the style of Chris Albin. But for my presentation, I actually want to do something a little different. I want to talk to you guys about how you can make good analogies. So a lot of us are here at Lambda School because we want to get good jobs after we graduate. Now, I want to talk to you about a skill you can add to your repertoire to help you stand out from other candidates. Learn how to explain counterintuitive concepts to people who don't have a data science or machine learning background. Today, we'll use temperature as the example. So let's say you're at an interview at company X, it's your 4th interview. They want you to meet with the marketing team. You've made it past the data science team. The people interviewing you don't have a DS or ML background. Luckily for you, you built a marketing model last year. While you're walking them through your model, you mentioned that you were able to improve accuracy by changing the temperature. How hot or cold the computer was, they say? No, it's a data science thing, you reply. Let me explain. This would be a terrible explanation in that interview. If you're in your data science interview, it would be a great explanation. But for someone who doesn't have a mathematical background, too many words, too many formulas, it's a black box. So let's look at a better way to explain it. First, you could start with an interactive visual. Here we have a model that wants to pick the biggest number. And if we told the model to look at 1 or 2 layers, it would pick on the right side. However, if we tell the model to look all the way on the left, it's going to pick that big number there. Now, the pros are, if you tell it to look deeper, it's going to have more accurate results, but the cons are, it's more expensive. So in visualizations, this also happens. Here's a pair plot. By the time I decode this, the bytes in my computer will be dead. This isn't quite as bad, but at least it's more legible, right? So take your data and make those useful analogies. A real world example is rock climbing. If you ever want to get to the top of any kind of artificial rock climbing thing, you have to go left, right, down, sometimes even around to get to your goal. So make sure that in your model and in your career search, you're using temperature so that you find the best results. And I will drop my note in the Slack so you guys can all check that out. Thank you.
Pierre, very creative and excellent communication. I will confess there was a moment when you had that equation. I'm like, I'm not sure where he's going with this, but when you showed them the simpler way, that could be an awesome storytelling project. It's not so much like data set analysis storytelling, but it's like algorithm storytelling, and that would be an outstanding thing for your portfolio. So write up what you said and intersperse it with the graphics. Great job. So next we are going to go back to Zarina, please. So Zarina, if you want to share your screen and unmute. So I see unmuted, just not your screen quite yet. Hey, Zarina, can you hear us? We'll give it one more try at the end. Edward, can we jump to you? I didn't give you the heads up, but would you be good to go? All right,
I'm ready
awesome.
to go. All right, let me just share real quick. And can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
All right, so I'm a video game junkie and I love making money. So my question was, how can I make money in video games? So I used an API for a game called Path of Exile. There's about 150 currencies that are used in that game. So I won't go into too much details, but I modeled my data a lot like the stock market, right? I took all the transactions that were happening in real time from 2017 till November 9th, and I took the low and the high of their opening and closing amounts. And then I normalized that currency by using a currency called Chaos Orb, which is the most traded, to sort of compare all the other currencies with. Then I made separate data frames for each currency, did some distributions, which don't really have any meaning in the context of this presentation. Made a weird little doodad that kind of tracks the closing and opening of the currencies in real time, like whatever currencies you feed into it, which just kind of helped me visualize like how are these changing on a daily basis. And then I sort of took some of the most popular currencies and plotted them on line charts, and I started seeing this really interesting pattern occurring, where you can sort of see for the first 1/5 or 1/4 of each new league, there's this dramatic increase in price of these currencies. Even though they're different currencies, they have the same similar pattern. Even across, here's another type of currency that has the exact same pattern. Those almost look somewhat identical even. So the takeaway from this is there a way that you can make money? Yes. And when should I buy currency specifically for this game? In the first 2 weeks. Thank you.
Awesome. Perfect on timing. And I would tell you that I think you should, I think if you were to like go back and like write down what you said in this presentation, I actually think that it was stronger than some of the medium drafts. Like just explaining it conversationally and very informally, and even with a little bit of a sense of humor. Like seriously, if you could go to this recording, write down what you said, and I actually think that would tell your story even better. So great job, great project. Next up, we have Albert.
Great. You can see my screen?
Yes.
All right. So I looked into a little bit of the peer-to-peer lending company lending clubs data. So I was interested in understanding a little bit more about the hype that's going on with data science and machine learning in the sector. There's been a lot of proclamations and claims about, some magical formula that they're building from different companies that they can better predict default rates. So Lending Club, a little over a year ago, around September, started implementing a new model, which they claim to add a lot more variables, about 100 more variables, with 50 of them being very behavioral oriented. And my main takeaway is that there's definitely going to be help to improve the effectiveness of the predictions and the credit risk models for decision making. But much of it is really comes down to customer mix and better targeting. And if you go through the analysis, there's a lot more that kind of shows that there's a lot of confounding variables. It's really hard to attribute, what exactly is the best predictor. But a lot of it comes down to the same old metrics that's been used for, tens of years, for decades. And it's basically a lot of it is on the FICO score, debt to income ratio, and your salary are still the main contributors. But as you can see right here, the two pie charts, you can see how the number of bad loans has gone down quite a bit. It's hard to say that it's attributed to the model because there's a lot of different initiatives and products that they're going through. That's also making it have cut down on some of the bad loans that they've had. The other thing is that, the other takeaway is that basically that there's a lot of negatives and positives that's going on with the tracking of data, and just be really careful about what kind of information that you share with financial services companies, and you'll have a chance to basically get better rates and actually get good trade-offs.
Thanks, Albert. Sometimes we tease pie charts in our curriculum, but I think in this case those told the story, the before and after. So great job. And again, I would say write down what you just said in this call, and you'll have a story to publish. So that's great. Next up, we have Daniel.
All right. So let me start the timer. Oh wait, let's start when you share screen
first. Yep.
All right. I got my hands on a data set that sampled a whole bunch of water bodies around Mexico, everything from wells and rivers to industrial effluent and the ocean itself. And this database had measurements of a bunch of pollutant levels, specifically these 6 trace elements. And so I spend my time working on Cart2B to plot all of the sites around the country with all of their parts. The main part of my time was spent on a semi-interactive widget over here that would allow me to choose a couple of the different contaminants and then graph the whole thing. It goes significantly slower. Interesting. Anyway, as that refreshes, and I plotted all the around the country, and then went into a little bit of analysis of each one with pie charts that are hopefully properly used, but were generated in the last couple of hours, so they have some bugs in them still. And my main conclusions for all of this are just a different distribution of several elements. Arsenic here is the one with the biggest problem around the country, and there's several others that show different distributions, both at I'm looking at both the heavily contaminated sites that are 10x times the EPA's limit, and sites that are just above the limit. And I find that arsenic here and then later fluoride are mostly located in surface in groundwater sources, indicating their geological origin, whereas a few other pollutants like chromium over here are associated with industrial effluent and mostly found in rivers. And that's it.
Awesome, thank you. Very very well structured and concise story in the way that you told it visually and verbally, and in this presentation now on an important topic. So thank you for sharing. So next up we have John Humphreys. John, you there? Great, I'm seeing your screen whenever you're ready. I can see your screen, but I can't hear you. Okay, now I think I hear you.
Okay, I'm ready. The CDC predicts that by 2050, 1/3 of Americans, based on current trends, will have diabetes, either type 1 or type 2. 1/3. Okay, so why is that a big deal? Diabetes leads to heart failure, kidney failure, stroke, heart attack, peripheral neuropathies, a lot of problems. What to do about it? In type 2 diabetes, maybe metformin. Check out these links, you guys, in my post. You'll see the info I'm talking about here. Usually metformin is only started after a type 2 diabetes diagnosis. I looked at this UCI data set. Well, I'm not going to show it right now, but here's the hybrid data frame that I made, you guys. It's a combination of the UCI machine learning repository data frame plus some ICD-9 codes. Again, I'm talking fast because I got a lot of info to drop. Okay, this information looks like it's pretty generalizable. You look at the Caucasian race though, and see that that's skewed. Given my past history, I guess that diagnoses would be higher with increased age. Generally, they were. Here's where I show the metformin class label: yes, metformin, no metformin, versus patient age brackets. Here's the number of diagnoses versus the class label. Okay, look at that yes in there: 20,000, no, 81,000. But still. This brings me to my null hypothesis. So I tried to throw in a little statistical testing to get you interested, get y'all interested. Basically, it was a null hypothesis that there was no difference in number of diagnoses for whether or not a person was taking metformin or not taking metformin. Unfortunately, I got a negative finding. What does that mean? I failed to reject the null. I wanted to, and I wanted to p-hack, but I didn't. Sorry about the uhs and the ums in there. Let me throw out some thanks to Aaron, Ryan Herr, Tina, Albert, Peyton, and Daniel Harris. Word.
Awesome. We appreciate the shout outs. And I also admire your discipline to resist that urge to p-hack. And I admire the way that you were able to integrate a lot of impressive domain expertise in the medical and pharmaceutical domains to put together a great storytelling project. So great job. And next up, we have Ed.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. And John, if you want to stop sharing your screen, and then Ed can share his screen.
Sorry, guys.
All right, so now, Ed, I think you should be able to share your screen.
Okay, here we go. Okay, can you see?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, great. Okay, well, hello everyone. Today I'd like to take a look at the availability of clean water and arable farmland in the Middle East. I think a lot of us have seen in the news a lot of bad news, and we've seen it for a long time. But the conflict in the Middle East that began decades ago really continues to this day. And we'll take a look at a closer look at how the picture of clean water and farmland has been affected. All of the data here was obtained under the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. And there are several sources, but they are a very good aggregate of the data. So I did look around, but I stuck with them as my main source. So let's look into the data. And here's a first look at a couple of bar charts here. And the data comes from the UN in groups of 5 years. So we're really looking at 25 years of data in 5-year periods for each country. And if we look at this, the overall picture is not bad. In other words, I think main convention in thinking, the convention in thinking would be that there would have been some sort of detrimental effect. So let's take a look at the next chart here. Sorry. And the heat map makes things a little bit clearer. There is really no big loss in clean water availability, and also percent of area cultivated. So as we move up, we're looking at obviously some variations, but really no drastic changes or losses in terms of the availability of clean water for the population. However, this is not the whole story. Part of it has to do with the country's GDP. So one deeper dive would be to look at a chart where GDP is. But bottom line, good news. Despite what's going on in the area, it seems that clean water and farmland has still been safe and secure.
Ed, thanks for sharing. Great presentation on an important topic. Great work. Appreciate it. Next up, we have Tony.
Let me unshare, guys. Hold it.
Yep.
It's the red stop share in the top middle, hopefully.
I think I'm in full screen mode. Oh, I got it. Thank you. Sorry, guys.
No worries. All right, Tony. Just got like a half dozen left. I am super impressed with everybody's projects. This has been a lot of fun.
Okay. All right. I hope everybody can see my screen.
Yep, you're good to go.
Okay, I'm ready. So the topic is about, do you have fear of flying and avoiding bad airline? Let's look into this fear. Well, when airline plane fell down from the sky, high fatality from the crash usually reported at headlines news. And people remember headline news in the fear for a long time. So what do people do? The strategy is to avoid airline with high fatality accidents. Looking at the chart, the high fatality accident show up in the upper right quadrants. So basically, we're measuring high accidents, fatal accident in 1985 to 1999, and all the accident result from crashes. So in 1985 to 99, mostly Asian airlines show up in the high fatality news. 14 years later, a new group of bad luck airlines show up in the upper right quadrants, except China Airlines. So chances of the same airline crashes are rare and seldom repeating. Rare accidents are unpredictable and random. So if fatal accidents are non-recurring and random, so the choice to avoid accident-prone airline. So the strategy is to avoid bad airlines with bad airline with accidents.
Okay, fantastic.
In 1985 to 1999, common US major airline had high accidents and incidents related to and they show up in the upper right quadrants. 14 years later, almost the same US major airline had the same performance. So okay. So
great job, Tony. The time flies by fast, but thank you so much for sharing a great project with us. And do share your links in Slack so that we can spend some more time, learn more. And next up, we have Josh.
All right, can you see my screen?
Yep, we got it.
Okay, I did my project based on a data set that showed the gun violence in the United States for the past few years. It included things like the number of people injured, the number of people killed, the location, the date for every incident. So I wanted to map out on the US map exactly how many victims each state had. So I created a choropleth map on Plotly, and it's a work in progress, but for the most part, it's interactive. So you can brush over and see how many victims each state has. I found that California, Texas, and Illinois had the most shooting victims for 2017. But the thing about Illinois is one city in particular stood out. Chicago alone had almost 3,000 shooting victims, almost more than every other state except for California. I think this was what made Illinois significantly higher, almost 1,000 victims higher than the nearest state, California. So I wanted to account for population then. So I created a map, another choropleth map for shooting victims per 100,000 people. This time different states popped up, like Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama. And I wanted to find a reason as to why these states had such high victims per capita as compared to other states, where some of them had 3.8 and then the highest had 37, almost 10 times as much. I looked briefly into the number of victims per month. So to find a reason as to why some states had a lot more than others, I look into gun laws. I looked into the gun laws vary by state. So some of them can have 2, like Mississippi, and some of them can have over 100, like California.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing your project. I admire how you used a variety of chart types and libraries to tell your story, and I just wish it was a better story to tell about my home state of Illinois. So next up, we have Shreyas. So Shreyas, if you want to unmute and share your screen. Awesome.
Can you see my screen now?
Yep, we got it.
Okay. I can start. The project which I was working on was to analyze the Twitter sentiment based on the original tweet which was posted by Donald Trump. So when I started, like, I wanted to collect my data. Data collection was through mining the Twitter using the Tweepy API. And I designed my experiment in such a way that I get around 200 tweets from Donald Trump. And for each Trump tweet, I collected around 100 samples. This was resulting because of the limitations posed by the Twitter API. And for sentiment analysis, I used text blog. From initial analysis, what I did was I actually projected the Trump's tweet sentiment over the average quoted tweet sentiment. I saw there was some overlap, but the spread of Trump's tweet was much wider. This I was attributing for the fact that Trump tweet was individual tweets, whereas other tweets were actually averaged out when I consider other 100 tweets. Next, what I did was I tried to get specific data from the data set. I used positively polarized tweet and negatively polarized tweet. I found the spread to be more or less the same, but what I found was with positively polarized tweet, there was like a large number of positive tweets, and for negative tweets, it was like large number of negative tweets. So what next I did was I did try to plot the time axis, the timeline based on the sentiment, tweet sentiment. I did get a graph which was actually very like noisy, where like a lot of peaks and valleys. But I did try to find some logic out of here, where I found whenever Donald Trump posted something positive, its corresponding response was positive, and when Donald Trump posted something negative, its response was negative. So this I've taken a couple of snapshots and highlighting this tweets with annotations. Finally, I've aggregated.
Great, Shreyas, that 2 minutes flies by, but thank you for sharing your story. And I will give you credit for, you really did a great job, set an example working iteratively. I mean, you shared your work early and often, seeking feedback and being very receptive to that feedback. And I think that's an awesome way to work. So thank you for demonstrating that. So up next, we have Danielle.
As Danielle's getting started, just making sure somebody who's unmuted, so double check.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. The first question that I initially wanted to answer was what causes dog bites? Is it nature versus, is it nature or is it nurture? Unfortunately, when I went looking for data, there is no centralized location for dog bite data. And many of the data frames do not have connections at all. So I spent an enormous amount of time just going through data and deciding what data I wanted to use. And I decided there were two very interesting data frames. The first one was reports of bites based on, well, there was breed and gender in the data frame, and whether the dog was fixed. So I isolated those, and oops, let's go here. There we go. And this is a stacked area chart by breed. I used only the breeds that had 25 or more bites, combining the unspayed females, spayed females, unneutered males, and neutered males. And immediately you notice that the males take up a lot more area than the females. And so I followed that, and sure enough, there is really no significance between unspayed females and spayed females, or unneutered males and neutered males, but there is a significant difference between females and males. Wow, that went fast.
It does. It flies by. But Danielle, do drop your links if you can at some point into Slack. And I've got to say, that last chart you had, I mean, both the aesthetics of that, like just the beautiful color palette, as well as like you've got the interactivity going. You've got like dense insights and information there. That was really great. So awesome.
I did use Plotly for that, but that was
well, very, very cool. Great project. Thank you for sharing. So up next we have Sammy.
Can you guys hear me?
I see your screen and I hear you. Good whenever you are.
So the title of my project is called Visualizing the Madness of Crowds with Python. And the basic premise is that visual representations of data do a much better job of explaining things than numerical summaries when it comes to certain events like asset price bubbles. So and believe it or not, one of the earliest asset bubbles took place in tulips. So the data sets that we're going to be looking at are the price series of Bitcoin and the stock price of a company called Helios and Matheson, which is behind MoviePass. And we're going to be comparing them to the S&P 500. This type of comparison is standard practice in the industry. You always want to see how your investments are doing relative to the market. So here we have some descriptive stats of the three assets. And you can see, if you look at the numbers, you can tell that something's weird with the Bitcoin and MoviePass stock. But just looking at the numbers, if you're not a trained statistician or a data scientist, it's going to be very difficult to figure out if a bubble actually happened in these assets. Here are the histograms. Again, what you can see here are skewed distributions of Bitcoin and MoviePass. But again, they don't give you a full sense of what exactly is going on. And it's not until you actually plot the time series and compare it to the S&P 500 that you realize just how dramatic the price movements are for Bitcoin. And what you see right here is the classic hockey stick pattern that you always see in just about every asset bubble. Here underneath, and this is the S&P 500 versus the MoviePass stock. And again, you see multiple hockey stick patterns and a 900% change in price that took place in 2016.
Sammy, fantastic job. I love those annotations that help to tell the story, explain, and those small multiples making those comparisons. It's pretty stark, right? So you did a great job on that analysis and visualization. So next up we've just got 2 left, I believe. So Britton, and then we'll give Zarina another try here if we can overcome those technical difficulties. But first up, Britton.
Awesome. Okay, can you guys hear me? Great.
Yep.
So welcome to Adventures in NLP. Oh wait, where'd it go? Okay, so I selected the drug review data. Why I did that is because my wife has been struggling with depression for a long time, and it's really frustrating watching her go through one medication after another. And so I had the idea of a medication experience feedback analysis system that can do it in real time and at scale to enable doctors, insurers, and drug companies to help people with more effective medicine. So how did I think I was going to do this? With NLP sentiment analysis. But Britton, you don't know any NLP. Oh, dang. Don't worry. I came up with a method to learn NLP, and I call it Frankensteining. It's essentially where you take something that isn't working, like a random collab notebook that you find on the internet, and you make it work. Frankensteining is not where you take something that is working and make it incredibly better or faster better, but it works pretty well. So what I did is I first pre-processed all my data. I checked for nans, like we always do. I binned the data into positive, neutral, and negative. And then I took all the outliers that were sentences that were very long, and I cut them down. And then I applied 2 processes of stemming and removing stop words, which basically took all these raw comments and shrunk them down so that they were very easy to process for my algorithms. Basically, turn them into Kevin talk. So this took the 13.5 million words, turned it into 6.3 million words. Anyways, now it's time to bring the models to life. So I took all that data and I fed it into a logistic regression algorithm. I ended up getting best accuracy after, I think probably did 100 attempts, 100 different manipulations of it, 75% accuracy. I had 3 different types of embeddings, and those embeddings shifted the way that my model viewed the words. But I ended up doing my best one was my LSTM. I got up to 88.4% accuracy, and which means that I could accurately predict 90% of the positive words and 79% of the time I predict the negative words correctly. So negative sentiment correctly.
Britton, awesome. Please do post this somewhere where we can see it so we can dive deeper. Great storytelling, sense of humor. Going above and beyond models were certainly not required here, but you tell a nice story about it, and I look forward to diving deeper. So thank you for sharing. And last but not least, can we give Zarina another shot if you're there, and we can work through the technical difficulties. And if it's just not going to happen today, then that's okay as well. Then we can, if there's a way to quickly call in, then that would be okay as well. Or you can always just post your links in Slack. Well, we're trying to figure out, Zarina, was there anybody on the call who I've missed? Anybody who was? Oh, I hear you, Zarina.
Do you hear me now?
Yep, I hear you. Great. So if you can just get your
Finally, I'm so sorry for my technical difficulties. I don't know what happened today. And I'm sharing my screen. Do you see my
Awesome.
screen?
Yep, we're good. Go ahead.
Do you see my presentation call up?
Yes. Yep, I see it. So we're good to get started.
Okay, perfect. I thought, yeah, I know it's difficult to go after Britain, but I'll try to do my best. And my presentation is about sci-fi books. I wrote about that robots and AI replaced beasts. And maybe that's why my computer stops working. And then I also wrote that the robots, AI, and together with novel technology and space, it are the main contents of story for top-rated sci-fi books. It's a kind of continuation of Kaylee's research analysis. So I've got a data set that contains information about book titles, the date it was published, the content of the story, and the number of times it was top rated. So first of all, I looked at the whole data set and looked at the most popular content of stories, and then found out that novel technology is the most popular, and the second one is space, interplanetary, and then battles content follows it. And also, I analyzed the data set for male and female authors. So the most popular content is novel technology for both of them, but then male authors write more about interplanetary and battles, while females write more about romance, which is not surprising, probably. So the second question was, which contains are often found together in sci-fi books. So I iterated over my data and I plotted it in this way. So from here, you can see for each main content, you can see in this graph what are the second contents that are most frequently written that are together with this main content. So for example, for robots, you can see that novel technology is the second main content, or interplanetary also frequently found together with robots. Or for example, for like I wanted to show for the space interplanetary, you can see that novel technology, again, the most popular, and the second is multi-species. I hear the alarm. I'll put together my blog post today, and I'll put it on Slack.
Perfect. I'm so glad that we were able to get the technical difficulties worked through. So thank you for bearing with us, everybody. That was really great, Zarina. I mean, you churned out a whole bunch of quality visualizations there about interesting.
Thank you for bearing with me too.
Yeah, absolutely. So I believe that has covered everyone. And so I think, do we have a couple quick announcements? If I don't know,
I'll step in. But I want to start by first saying thank you, everybody. This was amazing, and I know I was not. Ryan Herr also deserves our thanks as well for shepherding us through this whole week. So thank you, Ryan. It's just great seeing how far you've come in so little time, and how you're already publishing, putting stuff out there. That really matters. That's great, and it's great that we've got you in that habit. Keep doing that. And I didn't tell you all about this, but I dropped the Zoom link to this presentation in the general staff channel when it started, and a few staff people, they just popped in and out. They stayed for 20, 30 minutes, watched some of the presentations, but I got multiple really impressed DMs from staff people. So you are crushing it, I believe, as somebody said earlier in the Slack. You're doing great. So on that note, there's one thing that I want to address. This is kind of the end of the presentation part, though, so I guess let's go ahead and kill the recording if that's okay.
Sure, just a second here.